China's strategic paradox: power expansion without war in the age of global transformation. How Beijing is rewiring the international order through economics, infrastructure, and calculated restraint. The 21st century international system is undergoing a structural transition whose full consequences are not yet visible, but those contours are already unmistakable. At the center of this transformation stands China, a state whose rise has been neither accidental nor chaotic, but methodical, a state directed and strategically sequenced. Unlike previous rising powers that announce themselves through territorial conquest or military confrontation, China's ascent has unfolded through a subtler architecture of influence, one that relies on traditional networks, infrastructure financing, diplomatic positioning, institutional participation, and technological expansion. This approach produces what analysts describe as strategic paradox. China seeks to expand its global influence while simultaneously avoiding the very conflicts that historically accompany the rise of great powers. The paradox is not a contradiction but a design principle, and understanding it is essential to grasping the geopolitical trajectory of the coming decades. China's official diplomatic language emphasizes powerful developments and sovereignty, non-interference, and mutual economic benefit. This principle functions as the public narrative of Chinese foreign policy, intended to reassure other states that Beijing doesn't intend to replicate the coercive patterns associated with earlier hegemons. Yet the observable pattern of behavior reveals a deep strategic calculus. China is steadily expanding its presence across regions historically shaped by Western influence, from Africa and Latin America to Central and Middle East as well as the Central Asian peninsula. The expansion is not random. It targets infrastructure chokepoints, energy corridor, logistic hub, and financial systems. Structural nodes that determine how global commerce flows. Control or influence over such nodes translate into long-term leverage that outlasts temporary political alliances or ideological alignments. The relationship between China and the United States forms the central axis around which contemporary geopolitics rotates. The rivalry is not merely bilateral but systemic, involving competing visions of world order, governance norm, global architecture. Beijing doesn't seek to Beijing doesn't seek immediate confrontation with Washington. Instead, it seeks to reshape the environment in which what rival in which that rivalry unfolds. One of the most consequential strategies is to exploit fractures within the Western alliance system. When transatlantic tensions rise or when US leadership appears unpredictable, China itself China presents itself as a stable and pragmatic alternative. This positioning encourages states, particularly in Europe, to hedge their dependence on American security guarantees and to explore strategic autonomy. The result is not the sudden collapse of Western alliance, but the gradual erosion of the cohesion which benefits China without requiring the direct confrontation. In regions of conflict, China's behavior reflects calculated restraint rather than ideological activism. Its approach to the Middle East illustrates this pattern. In Iran, China's engagement extends far beyond oil purchases. Tehran occupies a crucial geopolitical position, linking East Asia to Europe through overland routes, making it a central component to China's long-term effort to diversify trade corridors. Maritime routes such as the Strait of Hormuz or the Strait of Malacca remain vulnerable to blockade or geopolitical disruption, particularly in scenarios involving major power conflict. Overland infrastructure through Iran offers an alternative that reduces reliance on contested sea lanes. Thus, economic partnership with Iran is not merely commercial, it is infrastructural strategy disguised as trade diplomacy. In Syria, China has adopted a similarly pragmatic posture. Rather than intervening militarily or taking sides in the conflict, it advocates political settlement and reconstruction. This stance serves multiple purposes. It reinforces China's narrative of non-interference, preserves diplomatic flexibility and positions Beijing to participate in reconstruction and contrast when stability returns. Reconstruction is more profitable and politically advantageous than war fighting. By investing after conflicts rather than during them, China avoids the cost of intervention while still gaining influence in post war environments. This model exemplifies a broader Chinese principle: influence acquired through infrastructure investment tends to be more durable than influence imposed through force. Economic instruments form the backbone of China's global strategy. The Belt and Road Initiative represents the most visible expression of this approach. Through loans, construction projects, port development, railways, and industrial zones, China is linking dozens of countries into a network of trade and logistics oriented towards its own gravity. Critics argue that such projects can create long-term dependency, especially when recipients states struggle to repay loans. Supporters counter that these investments provide infrastructure that would otherwise never be built. Regardless of interpretation, the geopolitical effect is undeniable. Countries integrated into Chinese funded supply chains often align their policies with Beijing's preference, whether consciously or structurally. Economic interdependence thus becomes a mechanism of political influence. China's appeal to developing nations lies partly in its refusal to impose governance conditions. Western leaders and institutions frequently attach requirements related to political reform, transparency, or human rights. China typically does not. For governments that prioritize sovereignty or regime stability, this decision is decisive. For offering financing without ideological conditions, China positions itself as a partner rather than a supervisor. Over time, this approach allows to cultivate influences in regions historically wary of Western influences. The effect is gradual rebalancing of global partnership, with many states diversifying their external relationships rather than allying exclusively with one bloc. Despite its growing reach, China's expansion faces real constraints. Not all regions are equally accessible. Areas with entrenched geopolitical competition, such as the Arctic, illustrates these limits. Though China has expressed interest in polar routes and resources, its presence remains limited by the dominance of existing powers and by local political considerations. This demonstrates that China's rise, while insignificant, is rather omnipotent nor uncontested. Structural resistance from established power ensures that Beijing must proceed incrementally rather than decisively. Its strategy therefore prioritizes patience rather than attempting rapid dominance. China focuses on cumulative gains that compound over time. The broader significance of China's foreign policy lies in the systematic ambition of Beijing, which is not merely seeking influence within the existing order, it is attempting to reshape the rules that define that order. Participating in international institutions, creation of parallel financial frameworks, and promotion of alternative norms all contribute to this objective. If successful, these efforts could gradually shift the center of gravity of global governance away from its traditional Western foundations towards a more pluralist and fragmented system. Whether such a system would be more cooperative or more competitive remains uncertain. What is clear is that China's actions are not isolated initiatives but components of a long term design. The strategic paradox at the heart of China's rise is therefore not a temporary phase, but a durable doctrine. Beijing understands that direct military confrontation with established powers would risk derailing its development and trigger counter-alliances. Consequently, it seeks to accumulate power in forms that are less likely to provoke immediate resistance. Infrastructure, trade dependence, financial integration, technological standards, and diplomatic networks are the ways to move forward to. These forms of power operate quietly. They reshape incentives rather than borders, preferences rather than regimes. By the time their effects become visible, they are often difficult to reverse. For the rest of the world, China's trajectory raises fundamental questions about the future of international politics. One possibility is that China's rise will produce a more multipolar order in which power is distributed among several major actors, reducing the dominance of each single state. Another possibility is that the competition between China and existing powers will intensify, leading to sharper geopolitical divisions. A third possibility is that China's model will gradually redefine the very meaning of global leadership, replacing military primacy with infrastructural centrality. Each scenario carries different implications for trade, security, and outcomes will depend not only on China's choices but also on how other states respond. What distinguishes China's ascent from earlier historical precedents is its reliance on systematic leverage rather than overt coercion. Empires of the past expanded through conquest and colonization. China is attempting to expand through connectivity and integration. Railways, ports, digital networks, and supply chains form the arteries of its influence. These instruments rarely attract the dramatic attention associated with military campaigns, yet they can be equally transformative. Control over logistics can shape global power as effectively as control over territory. In this sense, China's strategy represents an evolution in the methods of geopolitical competition. The coming decades will decide whether this model succeeds. If China manages to maintain economic growth and technological advancement and diplomatic balance while avoiding major conflict, it could redefine how rising powers reshape the world order. If, however, rival powers unite to counterbalance its influence or if internal challenges disrupt its trajectory, the strategy may encounter limits. The uncertainty itself is a defining feature of the present era. The world is witnessing not a finished transformation but a process in motion, one whose direction remains contested. China's role in global geopolitical transformation is thus best understood not as a sudden upheaval, but as a gradual recalibration of international structures. Its actions reveal a state which is neither purely defensive nor openly aggressive, neither fully cooperative nor overly confrontational. Instead, it is a methodical construction of an environment in which its influence becomes indispensable. Whether that environment evolves into a cooperative multipolar system or a competitive arena of rival blocs will depend on decisions made not only in Beijing but across capitals worldwide. What is certain is that China's strategic paradox, expansion without open conflict, has already become one of the most defining forces shaping the architecture of modern world.